My beloved child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because there is something you need to hear before you move on with your day. What you are about to hear is a fictionalized spiritual message created for reflection and inspiration, but let your heart enter the story as though heaven has asked you to pause at precisely this moment. Something has changed, something has shifted in the heart of the person you love, and if you have been feeling that strange tension lately, that invisible sense that something is happening behind the scenes, you may not have been imagining it. There are decisions people make silently. Decisions they do not announce, decisions they make while staring at an old photograph. Rereading an old conversation, sitting alone in the darkness, or remembering the one person they never truly managed to forget, and the person you love has reached one of those moments. They have been thinking, they have been weighing the past against the future, they have been asking themselves questions they avoided for a very long time, and now, my child, a decision has begun forming inside them. But here is what makes this moment different: they did not make this decision because someone convinced them. They did not make it because circumstances suddenly became easy. They made it because something inside them finally became impossible to ignore, a feeling, a realization, a memory, perhaps even a truth they tried repeatedly to bury. You may have thought their silence meant they had stopped caring. You may have interpreted their distance as a final answer. You may have told yourself that if they truly wanted you, they would have already come forward. But sometimes a person can love you and still be afraid of what loving you will require. Sometimes a person can miss you and still remain silent. Sometimes they can look perfectly calm on the outside while fighting an enormous emotional battle within, and tonight, in this story, the battle has reached its turning point. So pause here, take a breath, because before I reveal what decision they have made, you need to understand what brought them to it. There was a moment when they tried to convince themselves that you were no longer important. They told themselves they had moved on. They filled their schedule. They distracted their mind. They spoke to other people. They tried to become comfortable with a life that did not include you. And for a while, perhaps they succeeded, or at least they thought they did. But then something unexpected happened. Your memory returned, not gently, not occasionally. It returned at the exact moments when they least wanted to think about you. A song, a familiar place, a phrase someone said, a date on the calendar, a dream, a photograph, a scent, a passing resemblance. Something small opened the door to something enormous, and suddenly, everything they had buried came rushing back. They remembered the way you made them feel. They remembered conversations that seemed insignificant at the time but now carried a different weight. They remembered moments when they almost told you the truth. They remembered opportunities they allowed to pass. And most painfully, they remembered the moment they chose silence when their heart wanted them to speak. That memory has been following them. They have tried to outrun it, but you cannot outrun something that lives inside you. Eventually, you have to face it. That is what they are beginning to do. And the first thing they realized was something they had been unwilling to admit. They are not as over you as they pretended to be. My beloved child, listen carefully. This does not mean you should put your life on hold. It does not mean you should chase them. it does not mean every coincidence is a promise. It means that within this fictional spiritual story, the person you love is confronting an emotional truth. And that truth has forced them to make a choice. For a long time, they lived between two worlds. One world was the life they had built, the other was the life they secretly wondered about. In one world, they appeared certain, in the other, they kept asking, what if? What if I had stayed? What if I had spoken? What if I had trusted my heart? What if I had not listened to everyone else's opinions? What if I had given this person one more chance? What if the ending I accepted was never the ending that was truly meant to happen? Those questions became louder. And then came the night when they could no longer avoid them. Imagine them alone. No audience. No family. No friends. No distractions. Just them and their thoughts. They looked at the life they had created and realized that something was missing, not necessarily a person. At first, they thought it was excitement, then they thought it was purpose, then they thought it was happiness. But eventually, they realized what was missing was honesty. They had been living according to decisions made from fear, fear of rejection, fear of being judged, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of disappointing people, fear of losing control, and somewhere along the way, they stopped asking themselves what they truly wanted. That realization frightened them, because once you recognize that fear has been making your decisions, you can no longer pretend you are powerless. You have to choose differently. And that is where their decision began. But here is the part you may not expect. Their first decision was not to come running back. Their first decision was to stop running away. There is a difference. They decided they could no longer keep pretending that the past meant nothing. They decided they could no longer silence the questions. They decided they had to understand what happened between you. They needed clarity, not fantasy, not nostalgia, not a temporary emotional rush. Clarity. They began looking at the story from another angle, and as they did, they noticed inconsistencies. Things that never made sense, words that did not match actions, moments where they had trusted assumptions instead of direct communication. They remembered advice someone had given them, then they remembered how they felt before receiving that advice, and something inside them shifted. What if I was influenced? The thought terrified them, because it meant they had to reconsider a decision they once believed was final. You may have never known how much outside pressure affected them. Perhaps someone told them to let you go. Perhaps someone convinced them that you were not serious. Perhaps circumstances made them believe the connection was impossible. Perhaps they were told that pursuing you would only lead to pain. And perhaps they listened. But now they are questioning why. That questioning is important, because a person who never questions their past cannot build a different future. Your person has started questioning, and once that began, they could not stop. They began remembering your face, not the version of you they heard about, you, the real you, the person they actually experienced. That distinction became enormous. Because they realized something painful. They had allowed other people's interpretations to become more powerful than their own experience with you. And now they are wondering whether they made a decision based on someone else's fear. That realization has created an emotional storm. They may be angry, they may be ashamed, they may be confused, they may even be angry with themselves for still caring, but underneath all of that is something quieter, regret, not necessarily regret that they lived their life. Not regret for every choice they made, but regret for one particular choice, the choice to remain silent when their heart was asking for honesty. And my child, this is where the decision becomes much bigger, because they are no longer deciding whether they miss you. They already know they do. They are deciding what they are willing to do about it. That is the real question. Missing someone is easy. Remembering someone is easy. Dreaming about someone is easy, but changing your behavior because you recognize what someone means to you, that requires courage. And courage is exactly what they have been wrestling with. They know that if they reach toward you, they may not receive the response they hope for. You may have changed, you may have healed, you may have built boundaries, you may no longer be willing to accept the version of love that once hurt you, and that possibility scares them, because they cannot control your response. They can only control whether they finally tell the truth. That is why their decision has taken so long. They are not only deciding whether to approach you, they are deciding whether to become honest with themselves. And that is a much deeper decision. There is another reason they hesitated. They have been wondering whether you still care. They have asked themselves the same question in different forms. Does this person still think about me? Would they even listen? Would they forgive me? Did I wait too long? What if they have moved on? And perhaps the question that hurts them most is this: what if I finally tell them how I feel and discover that I lost them because I was too afraid to speak? That question has been haunting them, and it is beginning to change their behavior. They may be quietly looking for an opening, not necessarily because they have already planned everything, but because they want to know whether the door is completely closed, and there is something almost poetic about this. The person who once expected you to wait is now the person wondering whether you still will. Life has a way of teaching people through reversals. The one who once held the power may discover that power has moved. The one who once assumed you would always be there may realize that you have learned how to stand without them, and that realization can awaken something powerful: respect. They are beginning to understand that your absence is not proof that you stopped caring. It may be proof that you learned to protect your heart, and that realization is changing how they see you. They no longer see you as someone waiting for them to decide your worth. They are beginning to see you as someone whose life continues whether they participate in it or not. That can be confronting. Because love feels very different when you realize the person you love is no longer waiting helplessly for your return. They have grown, they have changed, they have survived, and perhaps that is exactly what needed to happen. You were not meant to remain frozen in the moment they left. You were meant to become stronger than the version of yourself who believed their choice determined your value, and now they are encountering that stronger version of you. Even if they cannot see every detail, they sense it. Something about you feels different, something about the connection feels different, and that difference has made their decision more serious. They are no longer asking, "Should I contact this person because I miss them?" They are asking, "If I contact this person, am I prepared to be honest?" That question separates temporary emotion from genuine intention, and they know it. They know that returning without accountability would only reopen old wounds. They know that saying "I miss you" is not enough. They know that an apology without changed behavior is just another sentence, so their decision is becoming more complicated. They want to approach you, but they also want to do it correctly. They are considering what they would say. They have imagined the conversation, perhaps many times. They imagine seeing you. They imagine the first few seconds. They imagine whether you would smile, whether you would look away, whether you would ask why they came back, and in their imagination, there is one question they cannot escape: why now? What would they say? Would they tell you the entire truth? Would they admit how long they have been thinking about you? Would they confess that they never truly stopped caring? Would they tell you about the pressure they felt? Would they reveal who influenced them? Would they admit that they were afraid? These possibilities have been circling in their mind, but there is something they have not told anyone. They have already made a private promise to themselves. If they come back into your life, they do not want to repeat the old pattern. They do not want another cycle of closeness and distance. They do not want another chapter where fear speaks louder than love. They want certainty. They want directness. They want to know whether something real can still be built, and that is why their decision is bigger than simply contacting you. They have decided that they cannot keep living in uncertainty. They must know the truth, even if the truth hurts, even if you reject them, even if the answer is not what they want. They would rather know than spend another year wondering. That is a powerful shift, because sometimes the greatest movement happens before anyone takes a physical step. The heart moves first, the mind follows, the behavior comes later. And their heart has already moved. But wait, there is one more thing, because just when they became ready to act, something happened that made them hesitate again. Someone from their past said something unexpected, something that reopened an old wound. It made them remember why they walked away in the first place. For a moment, the old fear returned. They almost convinced themselves to forget everything again, almost. But then they remembered you. And this time, they did something different. They questioned the fear. They asked themselves where it came from. They asked who benefited from keeping them afraid. They asked why they had trusted certain voices more than their own heart. And one memory suddenly became impossible to ignore, a conversation from the past, a conversation that they had never fully understood, a conversation that may have shaped their decision about you more than they realized. They remembered who was there. They remembered what was said, and then they remembered something even stranger. One important detail had never been explained. For years, they had accepted that missing detail as irrelevant. Now it feels like the missing piece of a puzzle, and the more they think about it, the more uncomfortable they become, because if that detail is what they suspect it is, then the story they believed about you may have been wrong, completely wrong. That realization is why their decision has become urgent. They are not simply deciding whether to return, They are deciding whether to confront the truth, and confronting the truth may require them to confront someone else first, someone who has been quietly influencing the situation. Someone who does not want the past reopened, someone who may have believed the story would remain buried forever, but buried truth has a way of resurfacing when the right person finally becomes brave enough to ask the right question, and your person is about to ask it. They have already decided what they need to know. They have already decided whom they need to question. They have already decided that they will no longer accept vague answers. And there is one specific answer they are searching for, because if that answer confirms what they now suspect, then their entire understanding of your separation will change. They will have to revisit the moment they walked away. They will have to revisit what they believed about you. They will have to revisit their own choices, and then they will have to decide whether to come to you with the truth. My beloved child, this is the point where the story turns. The person you love has made a decision. They have decided that silence is no longer enough. They have decided that uncertainty is too painful. They have decided that before they can move forward, they must uncover what really happened. And they are closer to doing that than you realize, but there is something they are about to discover that could change the meaning of one particular day forever. A message, a conversation, a choice made behind closed doors. And when they finally learn who was responsible for the misunderstanding that separated you, they will have to make an even bigger decision, because that person is not a stranger. That person is someone they trusted, someone whose words once carried enormous weight, and when your person hears what was actually said on that day, they may realize that the decision they made about you was based on a truth that was never complete. The question is no longer whether they still love you. The question is what they will do once they finally know why they walked away, and the answer is already beginning to form.